August 10, 2025. Exactly 3:25 p.m. Deep beneath the soil of Keren, a Russian command bunker pulsed with artificial life. Air circulated endlessly through heavy filters carrying a faint chemical tang of oil, ozone, and recycled breath. Harsh fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, washing the underground gallery in pale, sterile light. Around a long, steel-reinforced table, 25 senior Russian officers leaned over maps, tablets, and digital displays. Tactical overlays glowed on the walls, projecting troop positions, artillery grids, and supply routes. Fingers traced arrows. Voices rose and fell in calm discussion. A colonel tapped a pencil against his notes, unconsciously marking the rhythm of the war outside. The atmosphere was deceptively calm. The commanders believed they were untouchable. They were deep underground, beneath layers of reinforced concrete, steel supports, and soil designed to resist even heavy missile strikes. The meeting carried an air of casual confidence. For them, this was routine, another planning session in a war they thought they understood. War, to them, was lines on a screen, coordinates on a map, commands transmitted by radio. The men believed themselves insulated from the chaos raging above. But war is never static, and safety is an illusion. Above ground, far beyond their awareness, preparations were unfolding that would render their steel fortress meaningless. For months, Ukrainian intelligence had mapped this bunker's every move, every antenna rotation, every convoy departure, every signal pulse. The very routine that gave the Russians confidence was, in reality, the thread that unraveled them. And even as they spoke, somewhere in the distance, a lone F-16 pilot was climbing into his cockpit, strapping down his harness, and preparing for a mission that would change everything. History often turns not in grand battles, but in single moments. This was one of them. The Watchers in the Sky War is not only fought with bullets and bombs, it is fought with patience, silence, and eyes that never close. For months before this day, Ukraine had been watching. The Russian bunker in Keren, buried beneath tons of concrete and earth, seemed impenetrable to those who sat inside. But to Ukrainian intelligence, it was a beating heart that betrayed itself with every pulse. Satellites overhead, high above the earth, satellites traced their orbits with mechanical precision. At dawn, at noon, at dusk, every pass recorded something new. Shadows cast by antennas stretched differently across the ground, depending on the time of day. Analysts studied those shadows, calculating angles and positions. Signals in the ether war leaves fingerprints not just on the ground, but in the invisible spectrum of the air. Russian communications, encrypted and coded, still revealed timing. Every transmission, no matter how secure, had a rhythm. And rhythm can be broken. Ukrainian electronic warfare units intercepted and cataloged the signals, building a living map of when meetings were held, when commands were issued, when silence fell. Over time, they discovered that the most critical meetings followed a predictable cadence. Commanders rotated in and out, but the core schedule remained. The drones that never slept. While satellites and interceptors provided the broad picture, drones gave the intimate details. Silent UAVs loitered above the border, far out of reach but close enough to observe. Their lenses zoomed in, catching the subtle movements. Trucks unloading crates at odd hours, technicians adjusting antenna clusters, fuel deliveries arriving in rhythm with key briefings. From above, the Russian stronghold appeared calm and steady. To an untrained eye, it looked secure. But to those who studied every frame, every signal, every heartbeat of its activity, it was clear. The bunker was not invulnerable. It was predictable. And predictability is death in war. A long patience. For the Ukrainian planners, this mission had not been born overnight. It was cultivated like a blade slowly sharpened on stone. Each day, more data was added. Each week, the picture grew sharper. The antenna array, the communication hubs, the entry points, the exits, the very ventilation shafts, all were mapped with surgical detail. The Russians believed that secrecy was their shield. But secrecy requires routine, and routine becomes a pattern. Once a pattern is discovered, it is no longer secrecy. It is a trap waiting to be sprung. And so, as the Russian commander spoke casually underground, their every move was already locked into the crosshairs of a weapon they could not see, could not hear, and would never escape. The sky itself had betrayed them. A lone hunter, far from the underground bunker, beyond the reach of its antennas and encrypted signals, another story was unfolding. It was not in a fortified base, nor under the protection of hardened hangars. It was in the quiet anonymity of a mobile airstrip carved into the Ukrainian countryside, hidden by camouflage nets, shielded by terrain, and guarded by silence. There, a single aircraft waited, not a squadron, not a formation, just one jet, an F-16 Fighting Falcon. The weight of a mission. The mission was entrusted to one pilot. No escort fighters to draw fire. Only decoy UAVs circling in the distance and surveillance drones feeding intelligence back to headquarters. Inside the cockpit, the pilot sat alone, his world reduced to glowing displays, switches, and the sound of his own breathing inside the helmet. Straps tightened across his chest, gloves tugged into place. Every motion deliberate, practiced, automatic. But beneath the ritual, he felt the gravity of what was about to happen. It was an operation aimed at the very spine of the Russian command structure. Success would echo through the battlefield. Failure could mean not only his death, but the loss of an opportunity Ukraine might never have again. The calm before the fire. The canopy lowered with a hiss, sealing him inside a bubble of glass and steel. The sounds of the outside world, footsteps, distant engines, the muted voices of the ground crew, faded into silence. Only the aircraft remained, alive with quiet hums and flickers of green across the heads-up display. He thought of the families who depended on victories like this. He thought of the men on the front lines, holding trenches with rifles, waiting for orders. He thought of the Russian generals who even now sat underground, believing themselves safe. And then he thought of nothing at all. Because in combat, thought can be a distraction. Only focus matters. One jet against a fortress. The odds were unbalanced. One fighter jet against an entire integrated air defense network, S-300s, S-400s, radars that swept the skies like searchlights, operators trained to track even the smallest echo. But the F-16 was not coming with brute force. It was coming with stealth of tactics, precision of weapons, and the nerve of a man willing to gamble everything on a single flight. Every dial, every display, every system was checked twice. 2 GBU-62 JDAM-ER bombs hung heavy beneath the wings. 454 kilograms each, waiting like silent predators. Their guidance systems armed, their fuses set to delay, their wings ready to unfold and glide them into the heart of the Russian bunker. A hunter in the twilight. The ground crew signaled. Engines roared to life. The F-16 shuddered, alive, like a beast straining against its leash. In the bunker far away, the Russian commanders planned in comfort. Here, in the cockpit of a lone jet, the storm that would undo them waited for release. The hunter was ready, and soon, the prey would never know what hit them. The weapons of choice. Every war has its symbols. For Russia, it was the S-400, the missile shield it boasted as impenetrable. For Ukraine, on this day, it was something smaller, humbler but far deadlier. 2 bombs hanging beneath the wings of a single F-16. The JDAM-ER, a bomb with a brain. These were not simple iron bombs like those dropped in wars past. They were GBU-62 JDAM-ERs, 454 kilograms each of steel, explosive, and precision guidance. JDAM stands for Joint Direct Attack Munition. It takes a conventional bomb and gives it a brain. A tail kit equipped with GPS and inertial guidance. The ER, extended range, comes from the folding wing kit that transforms the bomb from a blunt hammer into a gliding blade, capable of flying dozens of kilometers after release. Its delayed fuse was set at 1.1 seconds, long enough to allow the bomb to pierce into the earth or a structure before detonating. This delay turns surface explosions into subterranean killers, collapsing tunnels and suffocating air systems. Unlike missiles, JDAM-ERs don't advertise their presence with fiery plumes. They fall silently, gliding on invisible wings, nearly impossible to intercept once released. A strike designed for depth. The Russian bunker was no ordinary target. It was buried beneath layers of reinforced concrete, designed to withstand traditional bombardment. A direct surface strike would only scar its roof. But the JDAM-ER was designed for penetration and collapse. Its hardened casing could punch through reinforced concrete. Its guidance system ensured accuracy even under GPS jamming. The inertial navigation would carry it true. Its glide allowed release from far outside enemy defenses, reducing the pilot's exposure. This was not a weapon meant to shatter walls. It was a weapon meant to kill what walls protected. The F-16's loadout. But the bombs were only part of the plan. The F-16 itself carried a carefully chosen suite of survival tools. Chaff pod under the fuselage to scatter clouds of metallic strips, confusing radar-guided missiles. AL-50 towed decoy, trailing behind the jet like bait, designed to lure enemy missiles away. AN-ALR-56M threat warning receiver, the pilot's ears in the electromagnetic spectrum, screaming whenever radar painted him. ALQ-131 jammer, able to flood enemy radars with electronic noise, blinding them for precious seconds. 2 AIM-120 AMRAAMs, air-to-air missiles kept in case Russian interceptors took to the skies. 2 370-gallon external fuel tanks, extending range and giving the aircraft stamina for the low-altitude ingress and rapid egress. It was a loadout not of brute force, but of survival. Every system had one purpose: keep the aircraft alive long enough to deliver its 2 bombs. The pilot's edge. But even with all this, survival was not guaranteed. The Russian air defense network was dense, ruthless, designed to swat down intruders long before they reached critical targets. What gave the F-16 its edge was not invisibility, it was timing and geometry. Flying at 50 to 60 meters altitude meant hiding behind the Earth's curvature. Even the powerful S-400 radar, capable of tracking targets hundreds of kilometers away, saw nothing beyond 25 to 30 kilometers at such low altitude. The JDAM-ER's glide meant the pilot didn't need to fly directly over the bunker. He only needed to rise briefly, just long enough to give the bombs wings. It was like a thief picking the lock of a fortress, not by brute strength, but by exploiting every blind spot in its defenses. 1 jet, 2 bombs, infinite consequences. The Russian commanders underground had no idea that their lives hung on the wings of 2 bombs. To them, the S-400 was a shield no aircraft would dare challenge. To them, the war was numbers, maps, supply lines. But on this day, the war would come crashing down in steel and fire because one F-16 carried the right weapons, flown by a man with the nerve to deliver them. Into the shadows. At 15:03, the quiet hum of readiness became thunder. The F-16's afterburner lit, a spear of fire blasting behind it, shaking the earth beneath the mobile runway. The aircraft leapt forward, wheels pounding against the tarmac until, with a final shudder, it lifted into the air. The landing gear folded away with a metallic snap, and the jet tilted its nose down, straight into the shadows of the earth. The knife's edge of altitude. The order was clear: fly between 50 and 60 meters above ground. No higher, no lower. At this altitude, the world changes. To the radars of the S-300s and S-400s, the Earth itself becomes the shield. The curvature of the planet hides the aircraft, reducing the detection range from hundreds of kilometers to a mere 30. To the operators staring at glowing screens inside Russian command vans, the sky looked empty. But the pilot knew the truth. Flying so low meant living on the knife's edge. One mistake, and the jet could smash into the ground. One loose fragment of debris sucked into the intake and the engine could flame out. Every second demanded perfection. The terrain as enemy and ally. The pilot entered what aviators call nap of the earth flight. The aircraft hugged valleys, skimmed over rivers, and banked around ridges with violent precision. The terrain was both friend and foe. It shielded him from Russian radar beams, but it demanded constant attention. The flight computer strained, balancing wing load and thrust against turbulence. The jet rattled with every gust of wind, every pocket of hot air rising from the ground. The pilot's hands worked instinctively, nudging the stick, adjusting throttle, eyes flicking between instruments and the blur of land racing beneath him. On the horizon could be a tower, a ridge, or a fatal miscalculation. The mental toll. Inside the cockpit, the pilot's body was tense, locked into focus. Sweat pooled beneath his helmet, trickling down his temples. His breathing echoed in his headset, steady but heavy. His heart pounded, not with fear, but with the raw adrenaline of concentration. Flying low is not simply technical, it is psychological. At high altitude, there is space to think, room to recover from mistakes. Down here, there is none. Every second is life or death. The pilot knew that above him, far beyond his vision, Russian radars swept back and forth, hunting for a signal that wasn't there. He could almost imagine the operators, staring at static, wondering if something was slipping through their defenses. The silent witnesses overhead, Ukrainian surveillance drones, maintained their vigil. From kilometers away, they fed back data, rotating antennas, opening doors, shifting vehicles. To the pilot, they were his invisible allies, painting a picture of the target he would never see until the very last moment. One drone caught the brief flicker of movement near the bunker's entrance, technicians walking in and out. Confirmation, the meeting was underway. The commanders were inside, into the unknown. The world outside the cockpit blurred into streaks of brown, green, and shadow. It was a journey into silence. Radios remained mostly quiet, no chatter, no confirmation. The pilot knew what to do, and his commanders trusted him to do it. It was the mission of one man, one aircraft, one pair of bombs. And as the minutes passed, he disappeared deeper and deeper into the shadows, closer to the point where silence would turn to fire. The decoys dance. At 15:18, the silent ballet of deception began. Above the tree line, small UAVs, little more than wings with motors, rose into the air. They were fragile, almost laughably simple compared to the armored beast of the F-16. But on this battlefield, they carried the weight of life and death. Some broadcast intermittent false signals, little blips of electronic noise that looked, for all the world, like a jet streaking across radar screens. Others were fitted with optical reflectors, shimmering in the sky to confuse thermal and optical sensors. To the Russian radar operators, the tables filled with clutter. Contacts appeared where none existed. Ghost echoes jumped and vanished. In the haze of static and flickering lights, one thought began to gnaw at them. Where's the real F-16? The question was delayed. That was the entire purpose. Just a few seconds of hesitation could mean everything. And in those seconds, the real hunter crept closer. First contact at 15:21, the silence broke. Inside the cockpit, the ANALR-56M threat receiver screamed to life. A sharp tone filled the pilot's headset, and a warning icon blinked red across the display. He was painted by radar, illumination from the northeast. His heart rate spiked, but his hands moved with calm precision. He banked sharply into a beam maneuver, flying perpendicular to the radar beam. To the Russian operators, his Doppler signature flattened, vanishing into the noise. The ALQ-131 jammer pulsed, flooding the airwaves with broadband static. On Russian screens, his return fractured into nonsense. But the reprieve was brief. Seconds later, another tone. Missile launch. The missile streaked toward it, a white spear splitting the sky. The pilot widened his turn, slowed fractionally, disrupting the missile's predictive cone. At the last moment, the missile swerved, chasing the decoy. Seconds later, it fizzled into nothingness. The first shot was defeated, but the pilot knew it wouldn't be the last. The pop-up gamble. The clock ticked 15:22. It was time. The pilot pulled back on the stick. The nose lifted. The jet surged upward at a 35 to 40 degrees angle, climbing toward 2,000 meters. This was the most dangerous moment. Rising above the radar horizon meant every eye in the Russian defense grid could now see him. Operators scrambled, shouting coordinates, locking systems, preparing to fire again. But that climb was necessary. The JDAM-ERs needed altitude. The higher they were released, the further their glide. His heart pounded. The aircraft vibrated with strain. In the HUD, a green box locked over the target coordinates. The bombs were armed. The Russian operators had seconds. He had one chance. The silent killers. With a metallic clunk, the first JDAM-ER separated. Milliseconds later, the second followed. Wings snapped open, unfolding like predators stretching in the wind. Their guidance systems woke, GPS and inertial navigation aligning, their course locked with mechanical certainty. They began their glide, silent, invisible, unstoppable. The F-16 nosed down, diving back toward low altitude, pressing itself against the earth once again. Behind him, the bombs flew like hunters of their own, indifferent to radar, immune to panic. Inside the bunker, the Russian commanders continued their meeting, unaware that death was already falling toward them. In an instant, everything ended at 15:27, the first bomb struck. It hit near the ventilation shaft, the weakest point in the structure. The explosion sent a shockwave crashing through the galleries. Pressure chambers collapsed, corridors crumpled, lights flickered, then died. A second detonation followed moments later, deeper, harsher. Support columns shattered, electrical systems failed, walls cracked and folded. The underground fortress, built to survive, was torn apart from within. 25 officers, colonels, chiefs of staff, planners, were engulfed in chaos. Maps flew from tables. Screens shattered. Concrete rained from the ceiling. There was no time to escape, no time to think. For them, the war ended in an instant of darkness. Escape and silence. The F-16 raced away, hugging the ground once more. Within 17 minutes of takeoff, it was wheels down on the mobile runway. The pilot exhaled, his body trembling from adrenaline. The ground crew rushed forward, pulling him from the cockpit, securing the jet. The pod images were downloaded, confirming what everyone hoped: target destroyed. No rearming. No second mission. The jet had done its work. Behind him, the battlefield fell into silence. The domino effect. The collapse of the bunker rippled outward like shockwaves from an earthquake. Artillery batteries stopped firing. Supply depots froze, unable to move without orders. Engineering brigades abandoned projects. Drone reconnaissance was suspended. Forward units sat idle, waiting for commands that never came. For 72 hours, the Russian front line operated in chaos. Orders overlapped. Some units received nothing. Others received conflicting commands. Entire batteries failed to fire. Tanks sat motionless. Soldiers waited in trenches, confused, leaderless. Ukraine exploited the paralysis, pressing across 8 different fronts, applying pressure that the Russians could not answer. 1 mission, 1 pilot, 2 bombs, an entire sector of the war disrupted. Modern war hours later, Russian propaganda aired images of the smoldering crater. Commentators spoke of victory, of strength, of resilience. They showed the surface, concrete cracked, smoke rising, but not the truth beneath. Because beneath that surface, an entire command echelon had been erased, and even Russian soldiers who had survived nearby knew the truth. Some pulled out their phones, recording not to mock, but to honor. They had seen the impossible, a fortress destroyed by a single strike, a machine of steel that defied their vaunted defenses. This is modern war. Not a clash of massive armies, but duels of precision, of stealth, of nerves. It is fought with drones and decoys, with radars and signals, with bombs that think and pilots who risk everything. And in this war, victory is not measured only in ground gained or enemies killed. It is measured in the ability to strike fear, to paralyze, to prove that even the strongest shield has cracks. On August 10, 2025, at exactly 3:25 p.m., Ukraine proved just that. See you in the next video.